If there's one thing Sega and Sonic Team have knocked out of the park, it's atmosphere and world building. That's two things, but don't worry about it. When it comes to those, however, we've seen time and time again a masterclass of how to cohesively put together a product with continuous rising action, ultimately resulting in a finale that knocks our socks off. Sometimes this rising action spans in between games as well. From the streets of San Francisco and defending that same city against the monstrous personification of despair, to the remote remnants of a lost civilization and finally putting their greatest failure to shame. We're going to explore how finality is one of the Sonic series' strongest assets. Sonic's classic era, with very minimal dialogue and bare-bone cutscenes, has some impactful endings. The Hedgehog's foundation is standing on the theme of nature versus industrialization. In every single one of these games, you see the scenery slowly transition from vivid and lush to a washed out and barren. All of the storytelling is shown to us in a manner that's a blink and you'll miss it moment. If we're to look in order at the bosses of Sonic 1 very quickly, you'll see that with each iteration of a machine that Eggman throws at you, the space becomes more and more restricted. The spacious arena of the Egg Wrecker turns into 2/3 of your safe zone being dangerous with the Egg Scorch. His Egg Stinger pulls you into a false sense of security by having the entire field playable, but quickly switching things up and subtly lets you know that there isn't much time before the literal ground is no more. Labyrinth Zone's boss has you commit to the tightest platforming in the game, bar none. Starlight Zone lulls you into this false sense of security as well, but should you forget about the spiked balls, then your rings are as good as gone. Culminating in a final standoff with the Egg Crusher that has you dodging both Energy Blast and giant hydraulic presses in a limited space with no rings to boot. If I were to ask you what your favorite boss from the classic era was, what would you say? It's rare to see anyone say that the aforementioned Egg Crusher is, but most would point to one specific, or rather one set of bosses as their choice. Silver Sonic and the Death Egg Robot are the things that either make or break us. 0 rings, 1 life left, and the goddamn claws on the Death Egg Why do I keep dying? The gauntlet that Sonic 2 puts you through is one of the most frustrating instances of back-to-back bosses in the series, but it's also one of the most rewarding. A lot of folks have quit without ever seeing the ending to this game, and that's understandable. One could argue that the finale is poorly designed, but I disagree. Frustrating? Yes. However, something about those early Sonic games drives you to desire to get better at them. Something about having to overcome these insurmountable tasks are what makes this the most possibly rewarding classic game to a lot of people. Not to mention the spectacle of just barely making it from Wing Fortress Zone to the Death Egg Zone. The tornado can hardly keep up, and just before Tails enters the atmosphere, Sonic jumps. He makes it just in time, having to leave behind the one companion that he's had this entire adventure. Space in the background. Victory, though imminent, is going to take a lot to achieve. Sonic running from the explosion. Tails knowing there's still one more thing for him to do. Safe! A newfound trust and respect amongst now lifelong buddies. Perfection. The last 2 mainline Sonic games follow a lot of the same steps that their predecessors did, and it works out more or less. CD has the Race with Metal, acting as a lead up to the final showdown with Eggman in Metallic Madness Zone, and although the boss in the latter is incredibly easy, the cutscene after the fact is what makes this game's finale so good. Every animation in Sonic CD is goated, actually. There's only 2, but don't worry about that. After successfully meeting the requirements to get the good future in every zone and beating Metal, the only obstacle in your way is Eggman himself. Of course, you defeat him, but Little Planet explodes in a light show of joy depicting Sonic's face thanking the Hedgehog. S3 and K, on the other hand, is a gauntlet, but not in the same vein as Sonic 2. It's a much better rendition of the archetype. The Death Egg gets its own actual zone now, which is great, and even better that it doesn't disappoint. Eggman's final stand on his home turf. It's meant to put his greatest enemy through the ropes, with the hope that his genius will do the job before the scientist even has to think of doing it himself. Nothing in the face of nature's champion. The first hurdle. A sentient computer with the force of magnetism at its disposal, conjuring structures, platforms, and when all else fails, using a fraction of the power we'll see later to create a disintegration beam. Amounts to a simple pebble on the pathway to freedom. Second barrier. Eggman, having mastered the technique to control gravity on his magnum opus, the Death Egg, utilizes it to throw the fastest thing in the world for a loop, something Sonic's all too familiar with. Quickly dispatching that craziness, you move on over to one last-ditch effort from the Doctor. A seemingly insane method to get away with the biggest heist that Eggman has pulled off in the series thus far. The Death Egg robot, now scaling to a size bigger than any previous iteration. Sonic still braves this Goliath, as if it's nothing, and proceeds to give chase to his eternal foe over the next few instances. A space track, a flying convoy, and finally, a metallic shell of the Doctor's former glory. S3 and K's finale is one of my favorites in the series just because of the role reversal that we see played throughout the entire act. It is the metaphorical personification of what this series stands for, but squeezed into this digestible package. From the start, Eggman seems to have Sonic right where he wants him. Still believes the Hedgehog not to be much of a threat, and so he sends a computer after him. Once that's easily foiled, a still calm Eggman tries to use the laws of nature against Sonic. Little does he know, Sonic is the one that nature sent against him. This pathing continues, and we see a slow decline of the good Doctor from this confident tyrant to a scared little man in the midst of losing everything he's been working towards. Once again, all without a single use for words. Words are a powerful medium though, don't be fooled. So, if Sonic could light our hearts ablaze without, what could he do with them? There are a couple of stories that have taken my breath away in this franchise, and although each entry deserves its own deep dive, the finales of these next three have altered my brain chemistry. Let's change the order up though. When it comes to Sonic Colors, what's the first thing that runs through your mind? The story is on the lighter side of things, as after a decade of characters dying, coming back, and brandishing weapons, some corny jokes are the least offensive and warranted. For the most part, Colors is your classic Saturday morning cartoon shenanigans. Not much goes on behind the curtain, but seeing as this is a refresh of sorts for the series up until the 2020s, it gets a retroactive pass. Although, there's something familiar. A despair not too far-fetched from the adventures of decades past. You can play the zones in Sonic Colors in any order, barring the final one that is locked until everything else is completed. Most folks will go about things in a clockwise order, so we'll use that. If you do so, the final zone you'll visit is Asteroid Coaster, which is fitting since it goes with the narrative of those earlier Sonic games. Starting off in a colorful area, only to progress into more dim regions. Upon completion, the final zone will commence and you run down a space elevator track to get to the departure point. I'll say that again. You run down a space elevator track. Terminal Velocity is such a good song that it's stuck in many playlists to this day, but that's beside the point. Once you reach the boss proper, Eggman is again found at his wit's end. Humiliated by Sonic, he turns to what he knows best. His machines siphoning energy from a wild organism. The Hedgehog, with the help of his new alien friends, win the day, obviously, but the music that swells with each passing blow you deliver onto Eggman is truly a sound to behold. You can hear the main theme start to kick in. More of the wisps that you've saved along the way willingly stand with you, until... boom. It's not over yet. A black hole is coming, enlarging itself with every piece of this mechanical folly swallowed in its ever-encompassing grasp. Sonic has to run. You have to run! The second act of Terminal Velocity is damn good. It's a remix of the Act 1 run, but it's a higher octane version of a track that was already pretty high octane. Not to mention that, once again, you are running from a black hole! Sonic the Hedgehog makes almost half a minute outrunning the anomaly in his base everyday form. No Supersonic, no Chaos Emeralds for Chaos Control, nothing, nada, zilch. Oh yeah, he gets saved by the Wisp since he can't make it all the way down, so that's cool, I guess. Sonic Colors finale from start to finish is up there for me, and the entirety of the Terminal Velocity zone caps it off. I'd even go as far as to say that it's almost as good as... Sonic Unleashed is one of those games that I'd always knew would be great, even as a child. For as much as I've teetered the line on main for this game, I am a Day 1 Unleashed lover. I got the game for my 9th birthday 17 years ago, y'all can do the math on that, and I love this game all the same to this very day. While the game is great, there is one aspect that almost everyone knows it for, and it's this little thing called, yes, but no, not yet, Eggman Land. The most difficult beginning to a Sonic finale that anyone has ever seen all the way up until Frontier's Final Horizon update. The ultimate test of might that will surely piss you off. This stage is the most gauntlet-like gauntlet in the history of Sonic gauntlets. Quicker QuickTime events, damage sponge enemies, shortcuts that make you work for them. and platforming that will, sometimes, make you rip your hair out. Coming to a head in one of the best boss themes in the entire series, may I add. The Egg Dragoon fight did what the Egg Nega Wisp fight does, but a lot better in my opinion, and this is in part because of the stage that has been set. Eggman has both you and him plummeting toward the center of the earth, all the while committing himself to the bit. Even with his life potentially in peril as well, all he wants is you dead, and he wants it now. From a metallic shaft to the core of the planet they inhabit, the battle between these two very similar personas is still raging on. There can only be one potential victor though, and they just showed up. With the reintroduction of Dark Gaia into the mix, the good times keep rolling and we see a multi-phase fight, each with its strengths. Chip, dodging all of his other half's attempts at stopping any advances. Sonic, using his blistering speed knowing what little time he has left in order to capitalize on the opportunity that Chip has so graciously offered him. Success, but it's far from over. Dark Gaia has one more trick up its sleeve. A final form as if to bear whatever fangs it can at the only thing between it and eternal darkness. Endless possibilities begin to take form. Is the night to prevail? Has the time for the destruction of mankind finally arrived? Will the hero succeed? They succeeded. What makes the finale of Unleashed so special is the spectacle mixed in with the difficulty. As a wee lad, both the beginning of this long stretch of the finale and Dark Gaia's first phase gave me ample amounts of trouble. By no means is Sonic Unleashed an easy game to master. The time limit in this section is proof of that for players new to the boost formula, and it doesn't pull its punches. If you mess up, you're going to be sent back to the beginning of that section, and you better hope that you still have enough lives to try again should Chip's health fall to zero. The finale of this game literally forces you to be a better player. Should you fail, well, the end of the world as you know it is right there. It wouldn't be the first time though. We can all agree that Sonic Adventure 2 is the premier Sonic game, right? That makes this easy then. Allow me to impart just a brief bit of knowledge onto you, my friends. Have you ever wondered, or has it ever crossed your mind, as to why SA2 feels so complete in a weird sense? Like, if the series had stopped there, it would be one of the greatest generational runs of all time. Well, once upon a time, that was genuinely the case. The Dreamcast could not save Sega from financial turmoil, and with an unknown future, for all intents and purposes, this should have been the last Sonic game ever. Now, we know 24 years later that's not the case, but we're lucky it's not. For this game, the finale really kicks off once you get to canon's core, and I will say that it is the most potent use of a game's thematic that I've ever seen. Two previously opposing sides coming together as their goals of survival now align. There are 3 different tracks that play throughout the stage, each resembling the OSTs that can be found in a character's personal stages. More metallic booms and baps for Tails and Eggman. Rouge and Knuckles get a smoother beat, but it still has tints of the sounds from the mech stages. Sonic has this more upbeat and faster tempo that kind of makes you feel like the stage is telling you that things will get better, at least until the final stretch of the level borrows heavily from the second section of Lost World from Adventure 1. This twisted, monstrous arrangement of horns and other wind instruments that signify you're about to come into contact with something truly terrifying. In Adventure 1, it's the history of chaos and how he came to be. Adventure 2, well, the Bio-Lizard and subsequent Final Hazard fights are the victory laps of a lifetime. One lulls you into a false sense of security. The other is a triumphant finish to one of the greatest stories to ever grace entertainment medium. With the end of SA2 going the way that it does, we come full circle back to my point at the beginning of this segment. This is what could have been the final Sonic game. Forever. Shadow's death is symbolic, not only due to him overcoming the desire for revenge and deciding to save the Earth his friend loved so much, it's a potential goodbye to Sonic the Hedgehog himself as well. A finale that serves as a means to immortalize the blue blur forever in our hearts and minds, and from the looks of how everyone is still talking about this game 2 decades later, it did just that. That same sort of impact would walk on over that horizon in a way that shattered all expectations. Do you think the Final Horizon finale should be considered the canon ending to Frontiers? For this exercise, we're going to focus only on the Final Horizon DLC's finale, and here's the explanation. At the end of Frontiers, you get Sage's emotional sacrifice, and everyone but Eggman has something to celebrate about the journey finally being over. This would have stuck the landing had the post-credits scene not shown her immediate return. In the moment leading up to Sage's final blow, stakes were at an all-time high. Sonic couldn't finish the job, and with no other options left throughout all of the calculations she had performed, the only one where they win is where Sage does what she does. Admittingly, there is a somber feeling after the fact, but it doesn't last long. Imagine if in SA2 or Infinity War for any Marvel fans, Shadow and Doctor Strange respectively are shown to have survived their fates accordingly right after the fact. All the tension and sorrow are gone. Final Horizon, a year after the base game released, for better or worse, changes it so everyone wins and gets to go home. In that though, the sequences and build up to the moment are what make everything worthwhile. Trying to forget the insane difficulty spike, all the characters working together is a nice callback to the games of Sonic's past. The gameplay loop for the extra cast is mostly the same with small variations, but that's okay. Sonic finally having help after 4 islands of near complete isolation and being alone with his thoughts is a refreshing sight after such a long journey. Knowing that the faster the gems can be acquired, the better, but he can't do this solo. The Master Coco trials harken back to the Unleashed finale, in that you need to demonstrate complete mastery over the techniques and battle knowledge you've gained thus far. One mistake and you're finished. Do-overs? Oh yeah, of course. Try as many times as you so choose. However, the self-doubt will begin to set in if you have to attempt it too many times. The game wants you to prove that you're worth your weight in gold and it won't accept any less. After all is said and done though, a sense of relief. You know how this last Titan boss fight is going to play out. I mean, you beat Frontiers on the hardest difficulty shortly after it came out, right? This is it! The final blow! You won! Wait. The end fusing with Supreme is truly the highlight of Sonic Frontiers as we know it, in part because of the metaphorical implications. This entity went from nearly exterminating a whole demographic of people to being trapped by said people, only to get its lick back by puppeteering the same machinery that was used to combat it. Eons after the ancients have perished, the end still will not let them rest. It takes something way beyond what Sonic himself was capable of in order to defeat this monstrosity. Between the music, Super Sonic 2's more serious demeanor, and the atmosphere or difficulty of this final boss, it's one of the best fights in the series. For a second, I was hoping that Sonic Team would bring back the amnesia plot right here. With Sonic having surpassed his limits and Master Coco warning him about the cyber power's drawbacks, it would have been a nice role reversal. Sage having lost something in base game Frontiers, and Sonic in the DLC. That amnesia plot is something that the whole game was supposed to focus on, but they may very well be saving that for a future game. C'est la vie. The Sonic series would be nowhere if it weren't for how strong their endings are. This is the hallmark of whether these games are remembered fondly by the masses or not. Sitting at the end of things like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Unleashed, etc., and hearing those main themes play make you feel accomplished. Then you have projects like Secret Rings or a Black Knight that I couldn't focus on, but those have phenomenal stories front to back as well. There are some periods of time for this series where the endings and the games overall are inconsistent though, unfortunately. Weirdly enough, these inconsistencies bleed over into actual gameplay as well, and if you're curious about what the history of that looks like, I've put together just a perfect video for you. Catch you next time.